Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. My name is Amit. The title of the video is correct. Joe Biden lied about student loans. This is not to say that Joe Biden's a bad person. This is not to say that he shouldn't be the president. This is rather to say that he flat out lied about student loans. This is coming from someone who voted for Joe Biden. So I voted partly on the premise that, I thought he was going to cancel these $10,000 of student loan per borrower. He did not do that. I also have $10,000 and $10,250 of student loans. So, as someone who heard him say, I'm going to cancel $10,000 on the campaign trail a year ago, I was like, well, I will gladly give my final $250 once you have canceled those extenuating $10,000, and I'll go on my merry life and be done with student loans forever. But alas, that has not happened, and now I'm getting emails every day from the Department of Education saying, are you ready to pay back your student loan? No, I'm not. Stop asking me. This video is going to be a couple things. Number one, this is not a video to disparage on Joe Biden or to talk crap about him or whatever. Rather, we're going to do two things in this video. We're going to analyze the reasons student loans should be abolished, or at least a significant amount of student loans should be canceled by the government. And then we're going to talk about why they shouldn't. There are a lot of macro political and economic reasons why I do see the logic in not getting rid of student loans, and I ultimately can't blame Biden completely. But I also see a lot of the reasons why he should do it, especially when he promised to do it. And the dichotomy of those two things are what we're going to discuss today. So if you have student loans or you're interested in the concepts of student loans, I think this will be an interesting video and ultimately give you some context on what student loans are, why they should be canceled, why they shouldn't be canceled, and what are the common arguments for each side. Okay, so a couple of key stats. Number one, Biden has canceled about $11 billion of student loans. So he hasn't canceled the amount that we've wanted him to cancel as people who actually have student loans, but he got rid of at least of $11 billion, so it's not the worst thing in the world. It just was for people who have been victims of fraud from some colleges who promised one thing and then didn't deliver. And it's okay, that's fine, but what about the actual, rest of the population that wanted their student loans canceled? So thank goodness for the people who got frauded that they got it canceled, but a lot of other people ultimately didn't get it canceled. Here's some reasons why he should get rid of student loans and why it would be an interesting thing to do. Number one, it would stimulate the economy. Now, we have a little bit of an inflation problem where we're going to talk about on the negative side for why student loans wouldn't be the most important thing to get rid of right now, given the things that we're dealing with. But if you were to get rid of student loans, at the end of the day, you would give people more disposable income. So if I don't have to pay the $200 per month that I'm going to have to start paying in February to the Department of Education or whatever loan services keeps emailing me every day, then I would have those extra $200 per month. I have a startup. I have a business. I have expenses for that business. I have different things that I could buy to help make my life easier, to stimulate the economy, to buy more things in the world that would ultimately allow me to be more productive in my business writ large, right? I could buy more lights in here. So those $200 matter, and those $200 could go into the economy versus going into loans. So it would fundamentally stimulate the economy if you were to get rid of at least $10,000 per borrower, because they would have $10,000 extra of income that they could spend in the economy. Number two, it would narrow the racial wealth gap. And obviously, this is a really big deal. Black Americans and Latinx Americans are much more likely to have student loan debt, particularly because they come from families that aren't able to afford college tuition at the rates of white Americans or Asian Americans. So at that point, you have a wealth gap that already exists, which is a racial wealth gap in America that is only heightened by the fact that now Black and Latinx Americans have more student loans that they have to take on. And because student loans obviously can reach the hundreds of thousands of dollars, that only worsens the wealth gap because now they spend most of their life paying that off, especially paying off the interest of it, versus actually being able to do other things with their money. So obviously getting rid of at least $10,000 for borrowers would eliminate a lot of that money. Third reason, most important thing, 15 million people have student loans in America that's $10,000 or less. So if he were to actually follow through on that promise, 15 million people would have their student loans taken away in an instant, which would be phenomenal. I mean, can you imagine 15 million Americans having more money to invest in the economy versus having to give it up to student loans for no reason? So that would be sort of a key element of a lot of different Americans that would ultimately have the ability to use their money in a different way, which that means, it leads to my last reason, is these people would now have the ability to start their life fresh. The first two things you kind of need to sort of succeed in America is a car and a house. Car, because you got to go places, you can't Uber everywhere, and house because it's one of the main ways people start to build some level of equity to their name, especially if they don't own a business. That house over time, 30 years on a fixed mortgage, usually becomes that form of equity. If you can't afford a house or a car, which means you can't be productive because you don't have the car, or you can't have a house and start building your equity and building some wealth, then it's tough in the beginning, especially if you're in your early 20s or early 30s. So if you were able to get rid of student loans, or at least reduce that burden a lot, more and more of these 15 million Americans would actually be able to put money into things that matter for the long term, things that would stimulate the economy, things that would allow them to actually pay more taxes in a meaningful way, versus give up money to the Department of Education just to pay for student loans. So those are some of the reasons why student loans and getting rid of student loans would be a good thing. Now, why should we not get rid of student loans? I was obviously very biased to this because I have student loans. And as I started doing more research, I was like, okay, maybe there are some arguments. I ultimately don't agree with it at the end of the day because I think it would still be a good thing. But at least in the macro level economy that we're living in right now, it might be beneficial to not get rid of student loans. Couple reasons. Number one, first one's a bit more philosophical. It's not fair, right? Like it's just not fair at the end of the day. If someone worked their butt off to pay off 50, 60 grand in student loans and they hustled hard over the past 5-6 years, and someone else gets a degree in like dance studies or whatever, and they have $70,000 and it's just taken away from the government, you kind of start to evaluate what are the incentive structures that are being built into the fabric of American society. Like someone can go to college, do a degree that probably has zero value from an economic perspective. And do all degrees have to have value economically? No, but you would also say yes, because it's like you're paying that much money, so you expect to get a degree that has an ROI potential. And when you're kind of BSing it and getting a degree that ultimately has no ROI potential, then why are you getting that money subsidized by the government for you to just basically smoke weed and drink in college? And like, this is just the reality and truth of the idea around student loans and people who get degrees that have zero value in society. So at that point, it's very important to sort of understand the fairness element here. I mean, if people think the game isn't fair and the game is rigged, it gets rough. Now, do I think ultimately this is a reason for why we shouldn't cancel student loans or cancel $10,000? No, because I think the vast majority of people are just under that pressure and it's not their fault, or it's not because they did some horrible degree that doesn't have an ROI, but rather it's because, college is very expensive and we need to get rid of those expenses in some capacity. But fairness is one reason to think about it as you're holistically trying to develop an independent opinion on if this is a good thing or if this is ultimately a bad thing, and what position you would be in if you were on the other side, which is something I'm trying to do more of as I get older, be less dogmatic, less ideological, more open-minded to the other side and to the other perspective. Number two is inflation. Look, inflation is here. We just got data that's about 6.8%. Inflation's large, probably in the double digits. I'm doing another video on why that's likely happening, which means if inflation is here, if inflation is here and the government were to print, I don't know, another couple $1 billion to get rid of more student loan, if he were to do the 10,000, I think it's like $400 billion. Don't quote me on that, but I think that's ballpark where it is for 15 million people. That $400 billion is a lot of money. And I don't know if they would get it through taxes. Probably not, because they haven't built in anything to the Build Back America Better plan that Biden's trying to pass that would actually allocate money just for student loans. So they would have to print it at the end of the day. Like that, I don't know where else the money's coming from. So if that's the case, then they would have to pump that money into the economy, which seems to be that inflation would only get worse. And that's the ultimate reason I can't blame Biden for this. Maybe he did want to do it. Maybe he didn't try hard enough in that first stimulus bill that they released. But I think at the end of the day, when his advisors told him, hey, it's going to cost $400, $500, $600 billion to do this, it's really going to suck with inflation. And we could either give people stimulus checks or we could do this. What are you thinking? Politically, stimulus checks were way better than student loans, even though there's an argument to be made against that. And he ultimately went the other way with the Build Back America Better plan. You've got Joe Manchin, who like literally is not going to let anything go through. He's going to let something go through, but he's going to be very hyper focused on getting rid of the stuff that doesn't need to be there because he already hates the fact that we're spending trillions of dollars. So student loans, something like that, that's just not going to make the cut. Child tax credits are probably more important than that. So that's likely going to make the cut over something like student loans, which means at that point, it's going to be a hard sell ultimately to get Manchin to agree with that. So inflation is one of the reasons why I think that wouldn't work. The second thing I kind of just referenced it is political capital, right? There are certain things that have to get passed, and political capital is a political science term that says if I have to get something passed, I have to work with the other side. In order to work with the other side, I need to understand how to compromise with the other side. Obama in 2012 only got some of the key pieces of legislation passed because of his ability to generate political capital. So in order for him to get the ACA passed, yes, they had a majority, but they had to get some Republicans to get on the side in the Senate. So they had to do a lot of negotiating, a lot of building out this plan in 2010 to ultimately get it passed. Political capital is what stopped Obama from getting some of the key parts of his policies passed in 2014 through 2016 because of the deadlock that there was because he didn't control the House or the Senate. So at that point, if you don't have political capital, which is money is capital that you can allocate, political capital is influence that you can allocate to get things done in the Congress and White House and the Senate and the House of Representatives. If you don't have the ability to do that, then Washington cannot get things done. And Biden is losing a lot of political capital, primarily because inflation is going up. That's not a good thing. People are seeing their gas prices. They're like, hey, I don't like this guy, which means I'm not going to be willing to give him that much more credit when he says he wants to pass more spending policies. And number two is that, people have a short attention span. Like, yes, you got them those stimulus checks. That's awesome. But what else have you done for people? And if they're not seeing immediate progress, and all people are seeing are higher prices, and all people are seeing are, more people not going to work and getting unemployment checks for being lazy, that's not how I think it's going, but that's sort of what the perception of a lot of people think of it as, then you're going to lose your political capital. And student loans at that point are something that takes away from a lot of political capital, particularly because of the fairness point that I mentioned. If it's unfair and people feel it's unfair, they're not going to be willing to give you that capital. But also because if Republicans in particular, and the more moderate Democrats, think that you're just pumping and inflating the money even more when we already have an inflation problem that is proven through the data, then at that point, it's going to be also less likely from a political capital perspective to get some of the key ideas of your campaign across, like student loans. Last thing is, and this is, I think, the biggest reason, it's not enough to win in 2024. Like, that's the biggest thing to me. Like, it's not enough to win. You could try to pass student loans, but if it's not enough to win in 2024, which it doesn't seem like it's enough to win, it seems like there's some other bigger issues he has to deal with, then you're not going to win, right? There's already a lot of people sort of estimating that in 2022, it's more than likely that Republicans are going to win the House and the Senate, and to take away the Democrats' very slim majority that they have right now via the VP breaking the tie, right? There really is a very small majority. So at that point, if it's not enough to win, and it's not going to be enough to ultimately generate attention at scale that's going to cast a Biden vote against whoever is going in 2024, then it's unlikely that Biden makes it a central part of his plan. Now, for people who have student loans, does that suck? Yes. Is that the reality of the world and we need to accept that it sucks? Yeah, because that's the reality of stuff. You vote for someone because they think they're going to do something. They don't do it because there's other macro level politics in place. And if you are a Biden supporter, you probably do want him to get elected for 4 years. And if student loans would stop that from happening, or the attention on student loans wouldn't be enough for him to actually have the attention on something that would be able to get him to win, then you kind of got to accept that and call a spade and deal with what it is as it is. So those are my thoughts on student loans. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Do you have student loans? Do you want to get rid of your student loans? Very interested to see what you guys think about it philosophically and practically, on if we could cancel it or on if it's a good idea from canceling it. So looking forward to reading your comments. My name is Mitt. This is the Daily Business Show. I'll see you in the next one.